Now we already learned about a couple of nice behind the scenes and core features of Vue. Let's now understand how it actually updates what we see on the screen. Of course, we learned about its built-in reactivity, but this is basically just how Vue detects that an update is needed and where the update is needed. But performing that update in a performance-optimized way is yet another thing. And I mentioned this before, and I'm going to show it to you again. If I inspect an element here in the browser developer tools, you will notice that if I type here and I click set text, only the paragraph with the text inside of it flashed here on the right. So Vue only updated this paragraph and nothing else on the screen. And Vue does that with a concept called the virtual DOM. So how does that work and why does Vue update the DOM like this? We got our Vue instance, our Vue app, and we got the DOM, the browser DOM, so the HTML content rendered by the browser, and therefore essentially what the user is able to see on the screen. Our Vue app, our Vue instance, stores data, computed properties, and methods, and the browser DOM is then influenced with help of that Vue-controlled template. That template content is rendered to the DOM, and during that rendering process, which Vue controls, the dynamic parts and placeholders, the interpolations and bindings are removed, and the actual values are inserted. I mean, that is what you can see here as well. We got the paragraph tag with the test text being rendered here. We don't have the curly braces here, yet we of course do have them here in our template. On the button, we got this add click thing, which is an instruction to Vue, and that's why we don't see it in the actual DOM that's rendered in the browser, because those Vue instructions are removed by Vue when it renders its template to the DOM. So when it basically converts its template to the actual HTML elements that should be shown on the screen. That's what Vue does here. And therefore, if we have data like this, we see something like this on the screen instead, if we use interpolation for outputting the data, for example. Now, of course, our data and our computed properties might change. For example, because the user entered something or clicked a button. And those updates should of course be reflected, but Vue should not re-render the entire page every time something changes, but only the parts that did change. Because if Vue would re-evaluate and re-render the entire page, well, that would not be great for performance if just one piece of text changed. For example, if just the title changed, but not the text property here, then only the h2 tag which outputs the title should be updated, and not the paragraph. Now, how could Vue ensure that this is the case, that it does not re-render the entire screen? Well, one possible solution would be that it basically compares the old DOM values with the new ones. So it basically goes through the entire rendered DOM, sees which content is in there, and compares that to the content it has stored in the data properties of the Vue app. And if there's a difference, it updates it. Well, it could do that, and at least it would not update the entire screen then, but actually it's not what it does, because reading the entire real DOM, which is rendered by the browser, all the time whenever something changes, is also pretty performance intensive. Maybe not as bad as re-rendering the entire page all the time, but definitely not great. Instead, as mentioned before, Vue uses a concept called the virtual DOM. It basically has a virtual copy of the real DOM, which is managed entirely in JavaScript and therefore in memory. It could look something like this: a bunch of JavaScript objects where Vue memorizes which HTML tag is needed and what the content of that tag is. And when data changes, it basically just creates a new virtual DOM, you could say, and compares the new virtual DOM to the old virtual DOM, and only differences between those two virtual DOMs are written to the real DOM. And that is way more efficient because doing such comparisons and updates in a virtual DOM and therefore entirely in memory is way more efficient than doing it in the real DOM, which was rendered to the screen. And that's how Vue does that behind the scenes. Whenever we change something, whenever I change this text here and I click set text, Vue detects this change thanks to the reactivity we discussed earlier in this module. And then it creates a new virtual DOM, compares it to the old virtual DOM, and detects the differences, and then updates the part in the real DOM where the differences were detected. That is what Vue does in a nutshell. Now, it should be needless to say that Vue has a bunch of optimizations in place that actually make this way more performant. In reality, it does not recreate entire virtual DOMs all the time. It has a bunch of optimizations for that. But this is beyond the scope of this course and really also not something you need to know necessarily. You should just know how it generally works to be aware of what Vue does, that it's not all magic, but that it's pretty performant.